Joining us now, Marc Thiessen, Fox News contributor and former speechwriter to President George W. Bush. If I could start with John Bolton and his firing. You know
Sure.
Bolton pretty well, and
Yep.
I actually thought that we kind of buried the lead yesterday. That he lasted for 17 months seemed to me to be quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, John was my office mate here at the American Enterprise Institute, so I've known John for many years. Look, I mean, John is a great conservative and a great foreign policy thinker, and he was willing to speak truth to power in the Trump administration, which good leaders want people who disagree with them, who are willing to say no. And I think what sounds like what the final straw was the disagreement over the deal with the Taliban, and particularly inviting the Taliban to Camp David.
Marc,
and,
I have a little sound
whether,
from the president on that. Could I play that and get you to react? Okay, watch.
Sure. Yep.
I'll tell you one thing. We are hitting the Taliban right now harder than they've ever been hit. But when they did what they did in order to create what they thought was a better negotiating stance, I said, that's the end of them. Get them out. I don't want anything to do with them. And they've been hit very hard. And I know for a fact they said that was a big mistake that they made, and it was. But that was my decision.
The president is, and he's done this a couple of times now, said it was my decision to invite and my decision to cancel.
Yeah.
So I don't know where Bolton fell on that, but assuming that he was probably against it.
Yeah, so I mean, the president is in the right place right now, and I agree with everything he just said there. But the problem is, what was the big mistake was inviting the Taliban to Camp David on the anniversary of 9/11, and John Bolton opposed that. And whether he was fired over that or whether he resigned, we don't know really what happened there. But good for him for standing up and opposing that. You know, when I was watching the 9/11 ceremonies this morning, and watching you on the air covering them, it was incredibly moving. But the thought that kept going through my mind was the president of the United States invited the people who did this to Camp David this weekend. I mean, it's beyond belief. And look, Donald Trump gets a lot of unfair criticism. I'm almost always the first one out there to defend him when he's wrongly criticized. This was indefensible. And so, if John Bolton, put his stars on the table or spoke up enough to the point that the president wanted to get rid of him on this, then he did the right thing.
And John Bolton certainly not afraid of interpersonal conflict as well. So I'm sure this isn't the last that we have heard of him. You mentioned 9/11. I do want to remind everybody about your service in the Bush administration. You were at the Pentagon on 9/11. What you all went through was quite amazing. But I do want to point this out. I think there has been some policy success. Look at this new poll, Fox News poll, asking which is the biggest threat. A mass shooting by a U.S. citizen, now that's at 60%, and an attack by Islamic terrorists, 17%. What I mean by progress is that 17 and a half years ago, everybody was so concerned about Islamic terrorism. And while we still have to be concerned, we have put America on a better footing in order to be able to prevent another attack.
That is exactly right. And look, we take it for granted now that the terrorist threat has receded. It's not that the terrorists gave up or lost interest in attacking us. It's because we sent the men and women of our armed forces to fight them over there, so we didn't have to face them over here, as we said in the Bush administration, and we've been doing that for 18 years. And what we found in Iraq when President Obama withdrew all of our forces from Iraq, that was when you take your boot off of the terrorists' necks, they come surging back. And so the lesson of that experience and the fact that we're not being threatened right now in the same way is that we need to keep our boot on the necks of the terrorists. We need to do it in Iraq. We need to do it in Syria. We need to keep pummeling them in Yemen and other places. And in Afghanistan too. We cannot pull out all of our troops and let those people come back in the country where they planned the 9/11 attacks.
Let me give you a chance for one last word, just to mention somebody that you wanted to mention that lost his life on 9/11.
Sure. Well, I was in the Pentagon, as you mentioned, on September 11, 2001, felt the building shake, smelled the smoke. I was fortunate and blessed to have been a few corridors down from the point of impact. My friend, Navy Commander Dan Schanauer, was not so lucky. 2 days after the 9/11 attacks, a Fairfax County firefighter was digging through the rubble, and he came into a conference room. And there he found a table with a bunch of people around it, including Dan. And what they had been doing is they were planning, they had already, even before the 9/11 9/11 attacks had happened, even before the towers fell and the Pentagon was hit, he was already gathering intelligence to go after the people who had carried out these attacks and to stop the next attack. And so Dan gave his life literally planning our counteroffensive, and he's a great American, and I think of him every time we celebrate one of these anniversaries.
And to be remembered, so many great patriots, you included. Marc Thiessen, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dana.